Hey guys, tonight we slip between the folds of a silk kimono, beneath the clang of armor and cherry blossom petals, to a place where war and quiet beauty collide in the most unexpected way. You're standing in a candlelit chamber, the air thick with the scent of incense and lacquered wood, while a man in full samurai regalia kneels, eyes fixed on a single crooked twig. You hear the crickets outside, the distant sound of water dripping. He moves, just slightly, and places the branch in a shallow vase. That's it. One motion. Deadly calm. You're watching a warrior arrange flowers like he's plotting a siege. And yeah, you probably won't survive this level of aesthetic tension. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and the local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the damp, earthy floor of a 14th century Kyoto alleyway, brushing past the edges of a hanging Norn curtain. Somewhere nearby, a koto plinks in the dark. You're not here for music. You're trailing a rumor, one whispered by time itself, that the same hands that wielded katanas also cradled chrysanthemums. It doesn't make sense at first. You picture samurai as stone-faced murder machines with a man bun and a moral code. But here's the truth scratching at the lacquered surface: the Japanese warrior class wasn't just made of muscle and blood. They were also deeply sensitive, almost absurdly poetic, and they needed a counterbalance to their otherwise blade-heavy lives. Cue ikebana, the precise, symbolic art of flower arranging. This wasn't just decoration. No pop-up Instagram bouquets here. Ikebana was a mental discipline, a spiritual process, a visual haiku made of twigs, stems, and stillness. And samurai? Well, they kind of needed that. You march through war for weeks, guts and rain soaking your armor, your nerves tight enough to snap, and then someone tells you to sit, breathe, and gently tilt a camellia. It's like therapy with sharp edges. Mainstream historians agree that this paradox, death-dealing warriors practicing flower arts, wasn't an outlier. It was institutionalized. By the Muromachi period, 1336 to 1573, ikebana had carved out a solid role in the life of the bushi, the samurai class. Shoguns endorsed it. Daimyo lords paid for tutors. You might be kneeling across from a guy who slaughtered 30 rebels last week, and he's spending an hour pondering whether the pine branch should lean 15 degrees more to the left. But don't mistake this for softness. The practice of ikebana was strict. It had rules more complicated than your high school group chat dynamics. The flowers weren't chosen at random, nor was the placement. It was all about asymmetry, impermanence, and space. Arrangements were meant to mimic the harmony of nature, raw, imperfect, fleeting. Sound familiar? It's basically the same stuff samurai meditated on before charging into battle. Now, slide with me a little deeper. Imagine you're inside a samurai manor on the outskirts of Kamakura. There's a tokonoma alcove in the main room. This isn't just interior design flexing. That alcove is a sacred little rectangle where art, calligraphy, and, you guessed it, a flower arrangement sit in silent glory. When a guest arrives, they bow not to you, but to the flowers. It's humbling. It's calculated. It's the samurai way of saying, I may gut you later, but for now, observe this seasonal pine in contemplative silence. Of course, not every samurai bought into it willingly. Historians still argue whether early warriors saw ikebana as spiritual enrichment or just another status checkbox. Was it soul deep or performative? Either way, they did it. And as warfare ebbed and flowed across feudal Japan, so did the petals. Now here's a quirk to cradle before sleep: the earliest ikebana schools actually used boat-shaped containers. Why? Because the first floral offerings were placed on rivers and ponds as acts of devotion. That image, a tiny boat of flowers floating downstream, is like some ancient version of sending a text to the gods. You, sorry for killing those bandits. Gods, nice chrysanthemums. We forgive you. Fast forward to the late Sengoku period. Japan's in total chaos. Feudal lords are beefing, provinces are burning, and everyone's either plotting a coup or running from one. Yet even in this madness, samurai still take time to perfect their ikebana. You see one sitting in a war tent, mud on his boots, blood under his nails, gently adjusting a plum blossom. That's not a contradiction. That's equilibrium. And maybe that's what strikes you hardest. In a world obsessed with fast action and brute strength, here's a class of warriors who genuinely believed that stillness was just as powerful. You don't just swing a sword. You place a flower. You don't just win battles. You win moments of balance. You pass a scroll hanging on a wall. It reads, "He who knows flowers knows fate." Cheesy? A little. But it hits differently when you've watched your friends die in the mud and the only thing that brings your pulse down is a perfectly crooked branch in a black ceramic vase. Still awake? Okay, imagine this. Two samurai generals are negotiating a temporary truce. No shouting. No posturing. They sit across a low table. Between them, a small ikebana arrangement of iris and pine. The message is clear, even if no one speaks it aloud, we both understand beauty. We both bleed the same. It's soft diplomacy with roots, literally. Then again, not every flower moment ended in peace. There's a tale, more whispered than recorded, of a disgraced warrior who allegedly hid a knife inside his flower vase and used it to ambush a rival during what was supposed to be a peaceful tea and ikebana session. Turns out, even pretty things can stab. But let's not spiral. The real magic here is how samurai used ikebana not just to show off or scheme, but to survive. Not physically, emotionally. You carry so much fear, rage, adrenaline. Where does it go when the battlefield empties? Into flowers. Into silence. Into arranging nature in a way that makes sense when nothing else does. So you keep walking. Past homes where blossoms lean in silence. Past training grounds where warriors sit still for hours. Past graves marked not just with swords, but with seasonal blooms. Tonight, as you drift further into this strange overlap of violence and calm, remember this: sometimes the most powerful warrior is the one who knows when to kneel, and where to place the lily. You step quietly through the pine-scented halls of a mountain temple, your bare feet cold against the smooth tatami mats. Outside, snow falls so slowly it's like watching time forget itself. Inside, there's a hush, broken only by the faint snip of scissors and the rhythmic breath of someone meditating. A monk, cross-legged, leans over a low table, arranging sprigs of plum and cedar with the same care you'd expect him to use placing relics on a shrine. But this isn't a shrine. And those aren't relics. They're just flowers, if you believe in just. This is where the real story begins. Not in the palaces or war camps, but in the silent hearts of Buddhist temples. Because before samurai touched a petal, monks did. You follow the scent deeper and reach a small chamber lit by morning light slanting through bamboo blinds. A monk gestures wordlessly for you to sit. You kneel, legs going numb almost instantly. He holds out a stem. A single narcissus. It droops a little, but there's strength in the arc. He places it in a vase shaped like a waterfall. Nothing more. And then, you get it. The silence, the simplicity, the absolute stillness. It slaps harder than any sermon. Back in the 6th century, when Buddhism first arrived in Japan via China and Korea, monks brought not just statues and sutras but also aesthetic practices. Arranging offerings of flowers on altars wasn't optional, it was devotion in visible form. And over time, the act of placing those flowers evolved into its own kind of meditation. These weren't bouquets. They were structured prayers. So when samurai later flocked to temples, not just for spiritual cleansing, but for schooling, it's no surprise they absorbed this practice too. You've probably heard of Zen meditation, sword drawing drills, tea ceremonies. Add flower arranging to that spiritual toolkit. Not flashy, but deadly precise. Just like them. One mainstream historical fact that makes this all click: many samurai received their early education from monks. That included not only writing in Confucian classics, but also calligraphy, tea preparation, and yes, ikebana. You had to be literate to lead. You had to be calm to kill well. And monks, weirdly enough, were the best life coaches for all that. There's even a particular monk who stands out like a wisteria in a pine forest, Ikenabo Senkei. He lived in the 15th century and is widely credited as the father of formalized ikebana. His temple? Ryoan-ji in Kyoto. His vibe? Part mystic, part florist, part chill grandpa who can quote Zen koans in his sleep. He developed the Rika style, an early form of structured floral design that emphasized vertical lines and symbolic balance. It was deeply rooted in Buddhist cosmology, with branches representing heaven, earth, and humanity. Senkei taught that the natural world was a map to spiritual insight. That if you could arrange a flower properly, you were arranging your mind. And you, as a student warrior, learned to listen to the stem as much as you would to a commanding officer. The flower, the monk says without opening his eyes, already knows where it wants to go. You're just helping it get there. Sounds like something a therapist would say, right after you finish crying into a tissue shaped like a lotus. But here's a juicy fringe tidbit to roll around your brain. According to a few obscure scrolls in dusty corners of temple libraries, some monks believed that flower arranging could reveal karmic imbalance. If your arrangement was off, too rigid, too chaotic, it meant your inner self was out of whack. And in some extreme cases, a monk might send you to do penance before letting you pick up another daffodil. That's right, you could be benched from flower arranging for having bad vibes. So now imagine you're a young samurai, maybe 14 or 15, sent to a monastery by your lord to study before becoming a proper killer. You learn to sit still for hours, to write poetry, to recite sutras. And somewhere in there, between calligraphy practice and sparring drills, a monk hands you a flower and says, "Balance this," and you balance yourself. You scoff. At first. But then you try it. And it's harder than it looks. You snip a branch. Too short. You place it in the kenzan. It leans like it's drunk. You try again. And again. Until finally, after who knows how long, you see it, the hidden line, the unspoken harmony. And something inside you stops spinning. You're not alone in this, by the way. Historians still argue whether this early ikebana training was universally practiced among all samurai, or just a refined pastime of the elite lords and their immediate circles. Some scholars believe common foot soldiers wouldn't have had the time or resources for such indulgence. Others argue that any warrior exposed to temple education likely encountered ikebana in some form, even if it was just cleaning up after a monk's morning practice. But let's not underestimate the monks. These weren't your average robe-wearing pacifists. Some were former warriors themselves. Others had deep political connections. Their temples were often safe havens, espionage hubs, or secret meeting spots during wartime. And within those sacred walls, flower arranging became both art and intelligence test. A way to see who had patience, discipline, restraint. And monks didn't just teach ikebana, they sometimes challenged samurai with it. You've probably heard of koans, those Zen riddles like what is the sound of one hand clapping? Well, one lesser-known koan goes like this: if the flower has no root, where does it bloom? And yes, someone probably threw a vase after hearing that. As you shift on your aching knees, the monk in front of you begins to rearrange the branches he's been working on. He changes nothing, and yet everything. A tiny adjustment. A breath. A world of difference. He nods. You understand now. It's like fighting, but in reverse. You walk through another part of the temple now, where ikebana arrangements sit in near darkness, barely visible until the light catches the edge of a petal or a lacquered vase. This isn't for display. It's for contemplation. Just like a perfectly drawn sword, an ikebana piece is a study in readiness and stillness. You leave the temple carrying more than lessons. You carry the discipline of pause. You carry the memory of a monk who taught you to fight your inner chaos with nothing more than a bent twig in an earthen bowl. As night returns and the snow piles outside, you find yourself missing that quiet room. The clink of the scissors, The hush of bamboo rustling in the wind. The steady rhythm of someone breathing slowly through their nose, arranging nothing and everything. You step quietly through the pine-scented halls of a mountain temple, your bare feet cold against the smooth tatami mats. Outside, snow falls so slowly it's like watching time forget itself. Inside, there's a hush, broken only by the faint snip of scissors and the rhythmic breath of someone meditating. A monk, cross-legged, leans over a low table, arranging sprigs of plum and cedar with the same care you'd expect him to use placing relics on a shrine. But this isn't a shrine. And those aren't relics. They're just flowers, if you believe in just. This is where the real story begins. Not in the palaces or war camps, but in the silent hearts of Buddhist temples. Because before samurai touched a petal, monks did. You follow the scent deeper and reach a small chamber lit by morning light slanting through bamboo blinds. A monk gestures wordlessly for you to sit. You kneel, legs going numb almost instantly. He holds out a stem. A single narcissus. It droops a little, but there's strength in the arc. He places it in a vase shaped like a waterfall. Nothing more. And then, you get it. The silence, the simplicity, the absolute stillness. It slaps harder than any sermon. Back in the 6th century, when Buddhism first arrived in Japan via China and Korea, monks brought not just statues and sutras but also aesthetic practices. Arranging offerings of flowers on altars wasn't optional, it was devotion in visible form. And over time, the act of placing those flowers evolved into its own kind of meditation. These weren't bouquets. They were structured prayers. So when samurai later flocked to temples, not just for spiritual cleansing, but for schooling, it's no surprise they absorbed this practice too. You've probably heard of Zen meditation, sword drawing drills, tea ceremonies. Add flower arranging to that spiritual toolkit. Not flashy, but deadly precise. Just like them. One mainstream historical fact that makes this all click: many samurai received their early education from monks. That included not only writing in Confucian classics, but also calligraphy, tea preparation, and yes, ikebana. You had to be literate to lead. You had to be calm to kill well. And monks, weirdly enough, were the best life coaches for all that. There's even a particular monk who stands out like a wisteria in a pine forest, Ikenabo Senkei. He lived in the 15th century and is widely credited as the father of formalized ikebana. His temple? Ryoan-ji in Kyoto. His vibe? Part mystic, part florist, part chill grandpa who can quote Zen koans in his sleep. He developed the Rika style, an early form of structured floral design that emphasized vertical lines and symbolic balance. It was deeply rooted in Buddhist cosmology, with branches representing heaven, earth, and humanity. Senkei taught that the natural world was a map to spiritual insight. That if you could arrange a flower properly, you were arranging your mind. And you, as a student warrior, learned to listen to the stem as much as you would to a commanding officer. The flower, the monk says without opening his eyes, already knows where it wants to go. You're just helping it get there. Sounds like something a therapist would say, right after you finish crying into a tissue shaped like a lotus. But here's a juicy fringe tidbit to roll around your brain. According to a few obscure scrolls in dusty corners of temple libraries, some monks believed that flower arranging could reveal karmic imbalance. If your arrangement was off, too rigid, too chaotic, it meant your inner self was out of whack. And in some extreme cases, a monk might send you to do penance before letting you pick up another daffodil. That's right, you could be benched from flower arranging for having bad vibes. So now imagine you're a young samurai, maybe 14 or 15, sent to a monastery by your lord to study before becoming a proper killer. You learn to sit still for hours. To write poetry. To recite sutras. And somewhere in there, between calligraphy practice and sparring drills, a monk hands you a flower and says, "Balance this," and you balance yourself. You scoff. At first. But then you try it. And it's harder than it looks. You snip a branch. Too short. You place it in the kenzan. It leans like it's drunk. You try again. and again. Until finally, after who knows how long, you see it, the hidden line, the unspoken harmony. And something inside you stops spinning. You're not alone in this, by the way. Historians still argue whether this early ikebana training was universally practiced among all samurai, or just a refined pastime of the elite lords and their immediate circles. Some scholars believe common foot soldiers wouldn't have had the time or resources for such indulgence. Others argue that any warrior exposed to temple education likely encountered ikebana in some form, even if it was just cleaning up after a monk's morning practice. But let's not underestimate the monks. These weren't your average robe-wearing pacifists. Some were former warriors themselves. Others had deep political connections. Their temples were often safe havens, espionage hubs, or secret meeting spots during wartime. And within those sacred walls, flower arranging became both art and intelligence test. A way to see who had patience, discipline, restraint. And monks didn't just teach ikebana, they sometimes challenged samurai with it. You've probably heard of koans, those Zen riddles like what is the sound of one hand clapping? Well, one lesser-known koan goes like this: if the flower has no root, where does it bloom? And yes, someone probably threw a vase after hearing that. As you shift on your aching knees, the monk in front of you begins to rearrange the branches he's been working on. He changes nothing, and yet everything. A tiny adjustment. A breath. A world of difference. He nods. You understand now. It's like fighting, but in reverse. You walk through another part of the temple now, where ikebana arrangements sit in near darkness, barely visible until the light catches the edge of a petal or a lacquered vase. This isn't for display. It's for contemplation. Just like a perfectly drawn sword, an ikebana piece is a study in readiness and stillness. You leave the temple carrying more than lessons. You carry the discipline of pause. You carry the memory of a monk who taught you to fight your inner chaos with nothing more than a bent twig in an earthen bowl. As night returns and the snow piles outside, you find yourself missing that quiet room. The clink of the scissors. The hush of bamboo rustling in the wind. The steady rhythm of someone breathing slowly through their nose, arranging nothing and everything. You're older now. A full-fledged samurai. Your armor creaks with weight, both physical and moral. Blood has dried under your fingernails more times than you care to count. You've seen the glow of fire on castle walls and watched rice fields turn into graveyards. But tonight is different. You kneel in your own home, an austere estate gifted to you after your last campaign. The war banners have been taken down. Your sword is resting in its lacquered stand. And in front of you, on a low wooden platform, is a plain ceramic vase. You take a deep breath. There's a sprig of red maple in one hand, a pair of iron shears in the other, and not a single enemy in sight, except maybe your own thoughts. Because now we're entering the peak of the samurai ikebana bond, the moment when flower arranging moved out of temples and into homes, armor chests, and the very heartbeat of the warrior lifestyle. It starts subtly. After centuries of monks guiding young warriors through the ethics of stillness, daimyo lords begin to absorb more than just lessons, they start to flaunt taste. By the 16th century, especially under powerful figures like Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, aesthetic mastery becomes political currency. You could conquer a province, but you couldn't rule it unless you also knew how to pour tea and place a peony without embarrassing yourself. One mainstream historical fact to pin down: during this era, the tea ceremony, shinoyu, becomes central to elite samurai life. And with it comes an expected companion, chibana, the tea flower arrangement. Unlike the more rigid ikebana styles taught in temples, chibana is free-flowing, seasonal, and deceptively simple. You don't design it, you let it happen. Just like battle, just like wind. You're invited to a tea gathering at a daimyo-esque castle. You expect formalities, maybe some poetry. Instead, you get silence, precision, and a flower so perfectly placed it looks like it grew from the mat itself. The Lord gestures at it. "This," he says, "is why I spared your life." You laugh, awkwardly. He doesn't. These little floral arrangements carry enormous weight. They say, I am refined. I am disciplined. I am worthy of trust. And the deeper you fall into the social whirlpool of high-ranking samurai, the more you realize, flower arranging isn't soft. It's survival. Now let's pick at a little-known tidbit. Many samurai owned flower cases in their travel kits. Yes, right next to their writing brushes, armor tools, and emergency sake flasks, they carried small, collapsible vases or bamboo tubes so they could practice ikebana on the road. Picture that, a war-torn riverbank, corpses in the distance, and a lone warrior quietly arranging wildflowers into a water gourd before setting up camp. Hardcore peace energy. But even within the calm, there's constant tension. You see it when you try to master Rika, the grand, symmetrical style promoted by Akenabo schools. Every branch symbolizes something: heaven, man, earth, river, valley, time. There's a main branch, shin, supporting ones, so, tai, and all must work in harmony. Sound familiar? It's a battle formation. A floral battlefield with no blood but just as much strategy. And you, sword hand trembling slightly from old injuries, spend your nights trying to perfect these arrangements. Not because anyone's watching, but because your mind can't rest unless something, anything, is in order. Still, not all warriors had equal access to these aesthetic pursuits. Historians still argue whether rural samurai, those serving smaller lords or guarding far-flung mountain passes, engaged in ikebana as regularly as their Kyoto-based counterparts. Some evidence suggests they improvised with wild flowers, simple vessels, and folk knowledge. Others believe ikebana was a luxury of proximity to power. Either way, even the poorest samurai could be found arranging plum branches in their spare time, sometimes with more artistry than the elites. And let's not forget the women of the samurai households. While the battlefield was a male domain, the interior was ruled by onabugeisha and samurai wives who also practiced ikebana, sometimes with more flair than their husbands. Their arrangements carried subtle messages, both aesthetic and political. A camellia cut too short might mean we're grieving. A blooming chrysanthemum placed in winter? Prepare. Change is coming. Arranging flowers wasn't just pretty, it was practically espionage with petals. You walk through your estate's inner corridor, past sliding fusuma panels, into the small tea room where your wife has placed an arrangement. 3 elements: pine, plum, bamboo. The Shochikubai trio. Together they symbolize perseverance, renewal, and strength. You pause. She says nothing. You understand everything. Now here's a weird but fascinating detail for your dreams. Some samurai were buried with miniature ikebana tools. Scissors, folding vases, and even annotated notebooks filled with drawings of their favorite arrangements. A sort of floral will, in case the afterlife needed a little sprucing up. And for the living, ikebana could also be a test. Imagine this: a lord challenges his top retainers to create an arrangement representing loyalty. No swords, no speeches. Just stems. The winner? Not the biggest or strongest, but the one who knew that a bent reed often says more than a straight one. Your own hands move with more grace now. The maple branch bends just so, mimicking the arc of the setting sun you saw last night after patrol. A white wildflower tilts slightly toward it, like a child reaching for a parent. You don't know the names of half these plants. Doesn't matter. They speak anyway. Sometimes, late at night, you practice arranging flowers with your helmet still on. There's something about the weight pressing down on you while you hold something delicate. A reminder, you're not just muscle. You're motion. You're meaning. And the oddest part? It helps. After battles, after funerals, after betrayal, ikebana is where your hands remember softness. Where your eyes adjust to something that doesn't bleed. And your mind, which rarely stops scanning for danger, can finally, just barely, breathe. There's a memory now. A friend you lost in the last skirmish. He used to joke that ikebana was your true calling. You stab people so you can pay for pretty vases, he'd tease. You both laughed. You laugh now, alone. and place a single sprig of his favorite tree, ginkgo, into your next arrangement. Just the one. Yellow like the edge of autumn. You leave it on the shelf. No explanation. The house is quiet. The flowers whisper nothing. But you sleep better that night. You wake before dawn, as always. Not because you must, but because you can't not. The habit of early vigilance is hard to break, even now. The house is silent, wrapped in mist. You slide open a shoji screen and step outside onto the veranda. The air is cold, almost glassy, and somewhere, a nightingale tests a note that sounds like it wasn't quite ready to be sung. Your mind is heavy. War might be paused, but peace feels more like an intermission than a destination. And this is when ikebana shifts again, for you and for the entire warrior class. It's no longer just a meditative exercise or a tea room nicety. It becomes part of your emotional anatomy. You don't realize it yet, but your flower arranging is changing shape, mirroring grief, resilience, and an aching kind of self-control that's too slippery for words. Let's step back. We're now in the Edo period, early 17th century and beyond. Tokugawa Ieyasu has unified Japan under his tight, suspicious grip. No more endless battles. No more shifting alliances. It's a lockdown, samurai by day clerk by night era, where warriors must trade bloodshed for bureaucracy. Your sword? Still polished. But it's mostly for ceremony now. Your days are filled with ledgers, maps, and official stamps. And the only thing sharper than your katana is your longing for purpose. So what do you do with all that coiled energy? You arrange. And not just casually. Now you study ikebana the way you once studied strategy, formally, obsessively, competitively. You join a school. Maybe a kenabo, if you're loyal to tradition. Or maybe you explore the fast-growing saika or shoka styles, which favor fewer lines and more philosophical weight. One mainstream historical fact to frame this shift: under Tokugawa rule, cultural arts exploded across samurai society. Since open warfare was off the table, martial families competed in arenas of grace, poetry, calligraphy, incense games, and flower arranging. The shogunate encouraged this refinement, using aesthetics as a form of control. Keep the warriors busy with chrysanthemums and they'll forget to sharpen rebellion. And it works. Mostly. You're sitting in a dojo-turned-salon, surrounded by other warriors, all hunched earnestly over ikebana scaffolds. It's weird. It's quiet. It's tense. Like a poetry battle but with branches. Your teacher walks the rows with the air of a general inspecting troops. Too literal, he mutters at one. Too sentimental, at another. Too hungry, he says to yours. You don't know what that means. But you trim the pine needle anyway. Still, you begin to feel something stirring beneath all this ritual. A kind of private language that grows with each arrangement. You're no longer copying the temple forms. You're riffing, pushing, questioning. What does balance even mean in a life where peace feels like punishment? That's when you meet someone who changes everything. She's older. Widowed. A former Anabugeisha who once fought off bandits with a kitchen knife and a hairpin. Now she runs an ikebana circle in the next district. You show her one of your arrangements. She stares at it so long you start sweating. Then she nods once and says, "You're not angry enough." You join her circle. It's more like a dojo than an art club. No compliments. No finding your inner flower. Just precision, philosophy, and slow burn guidance. She teaches you to strip away ornament. To cut with decisiveness. To leave space where the heart might breathe. And here comes our delightful fringe detail. Among elite samurai circles during Edo, there was an underground trend of composing ikebana arrangements based on famous duels. Yes, floral reenactments. You'd represent each fighter with a different plant or branch shape, then stage the combat within the vase. Pine versus willow. Peony versus plum. Some got so elaborate they bordered on tiny operas. It's performance art. With stems. You create your first dual piece on a rainy afternoon. It's inspired by your own worst day, the ambush in the pass, the comrade you couldn't save, the scream that still lives in your left ear. You use a warped cherry bough to represent the chaos. A single camellia bud for the friend. You position it low, almost hidden. The piece is almost too painful to look at. You leave it on your altar for 3 days. No one touches it. People begin to notice that you're not quite like the other samurai anymore. You refuse posts that offer prestige but no meaning. You spend more time with artists, poets, herbalists. You start growing your own flowers. In secret. Like some kind of botanical ronin. And there's a question you start to hear more often, whispered behind screens and over sake cups: is he still a warrior, or is he something else now? Historians still argue whether samurai who leaned too deeply into the arts were seen as enlightened, or untrustworthy. Some daimyo viewed such men as unstable, too poetic to follow orders, too emotional to lead. Others revered them as sages, the closest embodiment of Bunbu Ryodo, the dual path of the pen and the sword. You don't care what they decide. Not anymore. One evening, you're invited to display your work in a small exhibition arranged by the Ikenabo headmaster himself. You arrive dressed formally, hair tied, swords gleaming. But your piece? It's absurdly simple. 3 elements, a broken reed, a single blue iris, and a river stone. The old man approaches it. He studies it for a long time. Doesn't ask for meaning. Doesn't nod. Just places a hand on your shoulder and says, "Good. You finally stopped arranging for others." And it's true. You're no longer making arrangements to impress. You're not copying Rika diagrams or trying to cram symbolism into every leaf. You're expressing grief, joy, surrender. You're writing haiku in stems. And when you place the final flower, you sometimes catch yourself exhaling, like your whole chest had been waiting for that one breath. So here you are. A warrior in a world that doesn't need warriors. But you've found another battlefield. One where the enemy is impermanence. The weapon is presence. And victory looks like a single sprig placed exactly where it needed to be. Your home is filled with these quiet battles now. Some triumphant, others tender. Visitors say your arrangements feel like walking into someone else's dream. And maybe they are. You don't always recognize the person you've become. But your hands do. And the flowers? They've never judged you once. There's a cherry tree on your property, old, gnarled, a little too proud for how crooked it's become. Every spring, it explodes into a pink so bright it makes your eyes squint. No matter how many times you see it. But you've never cut from it. Not once. That tree isn't just a plant, it's a relic. A witness. A friend, maybe, though you'd never admit that out loud. Still, this morning, something shifts. The sky is gray but patient. The wind carries a kind of weightless promise. And you, barefoot, tired from a night of dreams too loud for sleep, finally decide, today, a branch from the old cherry. You walk to it with the same reverence you once used to approach an opponent on the field, eyes low, posture steady, shears in your hand like a tanto. One careful snip, and a limb of blossoms falls into your palm, like 1,000 tiny suns. You bring it inside. And tonight's arrangement becomes more than just art. It's memory. Mourning, mischief, and mystery. All things that begin to swirl together as ikebana steps into a new phase, not just a warrior's meditation, but an existential, emotional language you speak when silence is the only thing honest enough. Because now you're entering the strange, foggy borderlands of post-war identity. The battles are long over. You're older, softer in places you didn't know could soften. But your hands still remember grip, and your mind still scans for danger. Only now, the enemy is the passage of time. The loss of purpose. The erosion of everything that once told you who you were. Ikebana, in these twilight years, becomes something else. It isn't about demonstrating harmony anymore. It's about interrogating it. Let's anchor this with one mainstream historical fact. By the late Edo period and into the Meiji Restoration, mid to late 19th century, samurai status was in freefall. The feudal system collapsed. Stipends disappeared. Swords were banned. The class that once ruled Japan now found itself selling pickled radishes or posing for Western tourists. Some committed seppuku out of shame. Others simply faded. But a few, especially those who had practiced the cultural arts, adapted. They became scholars, monks, teachers, even ikebana masters. You might have mocked that path once. But now, it's your reality. You open a small studio. Not a dojo, not a gallery. Just a modest space with tatami. Lowers, pale light, and a low platform where you teach arrangement to anyone willing to listen. Former samurai, fishermen's sons, disillusioned students. You don't charge much. Just enough to afford rice and a little sake. Your students surprise you. Some have never held a flower that wasn't already dying. Some think it's ridiculous at first, warriors playing florist. But something shifts when they start to arrange. Their hands shake. Their breath slows. A silence falls that's different from shame or confusion. It's sacred. You teach them what was once whispered to you, leave space. Cut decisively. Let the branch speak first. And here's your quirky fringe tidbit for this section. Some former samurai created flower diaries, illustrated journals chronicling each arrangement they made, annotated with the date, the emotional intent, and even the weather that day. These books weren't public. They were deeply private, like confessional scrolls and petals. A handful survive in dusty libraries, stained with ink, rainwater, and the occasional drop of what suspiciously resembles sake. You've started your own flower diary now. Not out of pride, but because you're afraid of forgetting the way your fingers felt when you arranged with joy, or with sorrow, or that one time with a barely disguised rage after your cousin insulted your best camellia like it was a weed. You don't write full sentences anymore. Just words, and sometimes drawings. Like 2 reeds. No balance. Something's off. Maybe me. Blossoms fell early this year. Like him. Laughing iris. And just once. I think I'm okay now. But even in this post-war rhythm, the question remains, who are you without your sword? Without your title? Without an enemy? Historians still argue whether ikebana helped preserve samurai identity or erase it. Some say it was a soft landing, a way to maintain discipline and legacy when the world had no more room for swords. Others claim it diluted the martial code, replacing grit with grace. Maybe it's both. Maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is that you are still here. There's a moment, you remember it clearly, when one of your students, a young woman who never speaks in class, finally completes her first solo arrangement. It's crooked. The flower is too tall. The branch leans like it's hiding. But something about it sings. You don't touch it. You don't fix it. You just bow to her a little lower than usual. She cries. Quietly. Like someone who finally exhaled after years of forgetting how. And that's when it hits you, this isn't flower arranging anymore. It's healing. It's silent. Therapy with roots. Some evenings, after your students leave, you sit alone and arrange with no plan. Just instinct. A stem from the garden. A broken twig. A vase chipped from the last earthquake. These pieces are raw, weird, emotional. One even involves a feather and a bit of burned cloth. You don't show these to anyone. They're yours. Your language, your map, your scars. Let's take a moment for a callback. Remember your old comrade, the one who joked that you stabbed people just to afford pretty vases? You keep a single stone from his grave in your studio now. It rests in the corner, beside a small bowl of water. You sometimes place a flower there, no arrangement, just a gift. No words. You'd be surprised at how many ex-samurai come to your studio not to learn ikebana, but to unlearn something else. Rage. Fear. Control. They don't want to talk about war. They just want to hold something fragile without breaking it. And that's where your strange little cherry branch from earlier comes back in. The one from the crooked tree. You arrange it simply, horizontal, with a soft curl. A single white iris leans against it like a secret. You place it by the entrance to the studio. Everyone sees it. No one comments. But over the next week, your students start mirroring its shape in their own pieces. They don't realize it, but they do. And just like that, you've taught them your memory without ever speaking it aloud. That's what ikebana does now. It bypasses language. It preserves what words fail to hold. Not just for you, but for the next ones. The ones who never carried a sword but feel the weight anyway. You smile. Then trim one more branch. Just because. You wake up today and the world feels off. Like someone rearranged the sky slightly. Or tilted the earth just a little to the left. There's a breeze in the house, even though all the windows are closed. One of your sandals is missing. A bird has made a nest in your bamboo scoop basket again. You sigh, but not unhappily. These little absurdities are part of the rhythm now. And speaking of rhythm, your hands move before your thoughts do. You're already trimming stems before breakfast. There's no schedule for it anymore. No ceremony. No. I will now begin an arrangement formality. It's more like breathing. Like muscle memory, or muscle mystery. Because now, ikebana has completely absorbed you. You no longer ask, should I practice today? You ask, what is this branch trying to say? You dream in shadows and lines. You see asymmetry as beauty. You start looking at street clutter and thinking, that twig pile is almost poetic. You are no longer a samurai who arranges flowers. You are something much weirder and rarer, a flower arranger who used to carry a sword. You've entered the monk phase of your life. Quiet. Clean. Profound in the way a cat sitting in a window is profound, meaningful but unbothered whether anyone notices. And here's the twist, people do notice. Local artists now come to you for inspiration. Foreigners show up at your door with translators and sketchbooks. A tea master brings you a scroll one day that simply reads. Your arrangements are like forgotten prayers. You think he's being dramatic, but you also pin that scroll up next to your storage jars like a little humble brag. Let's ground this in one mainstream historical fact. In the late 19th to early 20th centuries, Japan underwent rapid modernization and westernization. Samurai culture was heavily romanticized, both within Japan and by the West. Ikebana, alongside other classical arts, was rebranded from a noble pastime to a national treasure. Ironically, this global admiration helped preserve traditions that might have otherwise withered. You're not teaching as much anymore. Your studio has become more of a sanctuary than a school. But people still arrive. Sometimes with flowers, sometimes with questions, sometimes with nothing but silence and eyes full of stories they can't say out loud. You welcome them all. And now for our quirky detail. During this time, some ikebana masters began holding Silent exhibitions, rooms filled with floral arrangements where viewers were not allowed to speak. Not even whispers. They had to experience the pieces like meditations. Some visitors reported leaving these spaces in tears, others in a kind of stunned clarity, as if they'd just heard something whispered directly into their bones. You decide to try this once. Just once. You prepare 10 pieces. Each arranged at different times of day, under different moods. One is all shadowy leaves. One features only wilted blossoms, yes, on purpose. One has a single reed bent backward into its own vase. You place them in a loop around the room, like stations in some strange, sacred ritual. People come. They don't talk. Some linger, others rush through like the silence is too loud. No one claps. No one compliments. But a week later, someone leaves a note by your gate. I remembered something I'd buried for 20 years. Thank you. You tuck the note into your flower diary. You add a drawing of a small, open gate. And then, something unexpected happens. You're invited to Kyoto. Not just for a visit, but to advise the Akenabo head family on an exhibit they're creating. You hesitate, your sandals are old, your legs ache, your posture's gone from majestic crane to wilted cabbage. But you go. The city is loud. Faster than you remember. The temple gardens are still there, but the air hums with trains and steam and shoes that click instead of whisper. Still, in a quiet room tucked behind the main hall, you meet the new generation of arrangers. Young, stylish, confident. Their tools are sharper, their branches stranger. One of them uses wire. Another incorporates glass. One uses dry moss in a way that makes you gasp. And here's where the scholarly debate slips in. Historians still argue whether modern innovations in ikebana are a natural evolution or a betrayal of its sacred roots. Some purists argue that adding artificial elements, colored lights, or conceptual statements distorts the essence. Others believe ikebana was never meant to be static. It was always a living, reactive art. You stand in that Kyoto studio, looking at an arrangement that includes a rusted bicycle chain wrapped around a single marigold, and you think, maybe both sides are right. You spend a week there. You teach a little. You listen a lot. You give advice only when asked, and even then, often in the form of more questions. Your presence is enough. A living bridge between eras. Before you leave, a young artist hands you a gift. A black ink sketch of your cherry tree. It's not perfectly drawn. But it's right. Back home, you plant a new tree. Not to replace the old one, but to keep it company. And then one morning, as the wind moves like a memory across your porch, you make what might be your last arrangement. It's instinctive. Quiet. 3 branches. 1 leaf. A small sprig of mountain plum, dried from last winter. You place it in the corner. No vase. Just nestled into a folded cloth. You don't take a note this time. You don't sketch it. You don't try to name what it means. Because you finally understand. It's enough that it was made. Your joints crack louder than your shears these days. You walk with the slow grace of a teacup balanced on a bamboo tray, fragile, deliberate, and only occasionally funny to the neighborhood kids. But still, you rise early. The flowers don't wait. Neither does memory. Your studio is quieter now. Dust gathers between visits. Some of your old tools have rusted, not from neglect, but because you simply don't need them anymore. You've simplified your arrangements, your meals, your days. Even your thoughts feel lighter. Less tangled. Yet one thought refuses to fade. What happens to ikebana after you're gone? It's not a question of legacy, not exactly. You've never chased fame. In fact, you once arranged an entire series of pieces inspired by the concept of forgetting, petals already fallen, stems turned inward, colors so pale they almost vanished. That exhibit was attended by 2 people. Both wept. But lately, students have returned. Not just to learn, but to remember. A grizzled ex-samurai who now sells pickles in the market brings you chrysanthemums wrapped in old newspaper. A painter whose brother died in the rebellion shows up once a month, just to sweep your porch. One child, barely 8, sits beside you every week, eyes wide, breath held, watching each flower settle like it's a sacred animal. So you start talking again. Not much, but enough. You tell stories, not just of war, but of arrangement. Of the first time you saw a pine branch cast a shadow that made you cry. Of the emperor's gardener who once arranged with seaweed and scandalized half the capital. Of how you once used a fishbone in a piece, just to see if anyone would notice. They did, and you still defend it as texturally innovative. You begin creating lessons, though they're more like riddles with stems. You write them on scraps of parchment, sometimes leaving them under rocks in the garden for your visitors to find. One reads, "Cut only what already wants to leave." Another, 3 points. One silence. That's enough. A third, scrawled late one sleepless night. Let them wonder what you meant. You don't claim to be a master, but others do. Let's pin this with a mainstream historical fact. By the early 20th century, ikebana had become institutionalized. Schools like Ikinabo, Ohara, and Sogetsu formalized their styles and curricula. What began as warrior meditation had now become a polished cultural export, with certificates, rankings, and global exhibitions. Samurai roots lingered in the discipline, but many modern practitioners had never even seen a sword. You're invited to one of these exhibitions. Big city. White walls. Spotlights on every petal. A crowd dressed more for theater than temple. It overwhelms you, but also awes you. The arrangements are daring. One features molten metal alongside lotus roots. Another mimics the curl of ocean waves using driftwood and dyed feathers. You chuckle at first, but then you see it, the same intention, the same space, the same silence. It's ikebana, just dressed for a different century. You meet a young woman who teaches arrangement in New York. She calls herself a floral performance artist, which makes you blink a little, but then she shows you a photo of her work, a cascade of autumn leaves arranged on the steps of a Harlem church. You feel your chest tighten. It's beautiful. Unmistakably ikebana. That night, you sit on your tiny balcony overlooking the lights of the foreign city, and you whisper to yourself, it survived. And now, your quirky tidbit, a few modern ikebana practitioners secretly incorporate their ancestors wore relics into their pieces, a blade fragment, a crumpled medal, a piece of family armor. Hidden, tucked behind branches or woven into moss. Not as trophies, but as echoes. Whispers. A way to say, we were this, too. You think of doing the same. There's a short tanto you've kept wrapped in silk for decades. You never use it, never show it. But one day, during a solo arrangement, something rough, with twisted root and dried thistle, you slide the blade beneath the piece, invisible except from one angle. You say nothing. You don't even photograph it. But you feel complete. Now for a scholarly debate, historians still argue whether samurai ikebana was truly transformative or simply a distraction from trauma. Some suggest it allowed warriors to channel aggression into beauty, thus preventing deeper collapse. Others argue it merely masked pain with aesthetics. One bold theory claims ikebana helped shape Japan's entire post-war identity, training generations to find strength and restraint. You don't argue either way. You just know how it saved you. The days pass gently now. Your hair is white. Your fingers slower. But every morning, you still arrange, sometimes only a single blade of grass in a bowl of water. Sometimes, a full display with layered symbolism even you can't quite decode. Visitors come more frequently, though many just sit in the garden. They don't always speak. Some leave flowers. Others leave tears. You've noticed something lately: your old students aren't copying your style. They're evolving it. One now arranges with bones and pine needles. Another layers leaves until they resemble feathers. Even the quiet child now grown builds pieces with movement, using fishing line to make the flowers sway in wind. And here's your favorite part: none of them ask permission. They just do it. Because they know, deep down, that ikebana was never about rules. It was about truth. And you've become a myth. There are stories now, whispered around temple courtyards and tea gatherings, that you once arranged an entire piece during a lightning storm. That you used moonlight to decide your cuts. That your cherry tree blooms longer than nature allows. None of these are true. Except, somehow, they are. You laugh more these days. Especially when someone brings you a perfectly balanced, symmetrical arrangement and asks for critique. You always say the same thing: it's beautiful. Now ruin it just a little. Because that's where the soul enters. Your diary is nearly full. Petals are pressed between the pages. Some fall out like memories. You let them go. You begin writing a final note. Not a goodbye. More like an invitation. A suggestion. You write: you don't need me to begin. Just a flower. And a little honesty. Then you close the book. The tree outside rustles. Your studio creaks. The wind carries the scent of plum and tea. And somewhere, a new student lights a candle, opens a scroll, lays out a vase, and begins. You rise before the sun, not from habit, but because something stirs in you. A whisper through the reed matting. A faint rustle in the soul. Today, you feel the full weight and lightness of everything you've ever done. The air smells of rice steam and crushed pine needles. You step onto the porch, barefoot. It's damp from last night's dew. Your cherry tree, your old friend, is shedding petals like a gentle farewell. You nod to it. You don't speak anymore. Not to trees, not to lowers. They already know what you mean. The last arrangement you make isn't meant to be seen. You don't plan it. There's no design. You gather whatever calls out to you. A broken bamboo stalk. One curled camellia leaf. A sprig of fern so delicate it trembles from your breath. And then, one final bloom, an out-of-season iris, purple and defiant. You place them not in a vase but on your old, cracked cutting board. The same one you used in your 20s. A whisper of lacquer remains. You leave them there, as if they simply fell into beauty on their own. Then, you sit. You don't do much anymore. Just sit and remember. Sometimes you imagine yourself as a crooked branch, strange, overlooked, but still part of the design. There's a visitor today. Young. Nervous. Holding a scroll like it's a kitten about to panic. He bows too many times. Fumbles over his words. I wanted to ask about the space between. You smile. Not because the question is good, it is, but because it reminds you of yourself. Of a younger you, trying to ask the right things. Afraid of silence. You don't answer right away. You sip tea. You let the silence grow legs. Eventually, you say, "The space between is where everything breathes." He writes that down like it's sacred. You almost chuckle. You offer no further explanation. He'll understand later. Or he won't. That's the gift. Let's anchor in a mainstream historical fact. In the post-war era, ikebana experienced a cultural renaissance. Japanese artists began blending traditional forms with international influences, modernism, minimalism, even pop art. The Sogetsu school, founded in the 1920s, led this movement, encouraging ikebana to exist anytime, anywhere, by anyone. And suddenly, the old rules were less rules and more options. Some call this dilution. Others call it liberation. You call it survival. It's funny. You spent your youth guarding rules like castle gates. Every angle counted. Every leaf had to face the right direction. But now, the only rule you teach is, listen. That's what flowers ask of you. That's what life asks of you. To shut up and notice. And here comes your fringe tidbit. In the 1970s, one avant-garde ikebana artist arranged lowers in zero gravity on a space simulation flight, just to prove that balance was a state of mind. The arrangement floated inside a sealed orb, suspended like a secret. It wasn't symmetrical. It wasn't even anchored. But it held together. You think about that sometimes, how even rootless things can be beautiful. Maybe. Especially rootless things. You're no longer trying to leave behind teachings. You're trying to leave behind emptiness, room. The kind of space that invites others to step in and wonder. One evening, a storm rolls in, big, theatrical, like a painter with no sense of subtlety. Thunder shakes the shutters. Rain lashes sideways. You light a single candle and watch. Shadows flicker across the floor. And then you do something you haven't done in years. You take your sword down from its resting place. You lay it beside a flower. No symbolism. No metaphor. Just coexistence. For the first time, you see them both for what they are, tools. One meant to end life. One meant to reveal it. And for the first time, neither frightens you. Now for a scholarly debate, some cultural historians still argue whether the arts truly transformed the samurai mindset, or merely disguised a violent heritage with elegance. Some say the sword was never really sheathed, just repurposed. Others believe arts like ikebana, tea ceremony, and calligraphy fundamentally reoriented the soul of the warrior class, teaching grace where once there was only grit. You lean toward the second camp. Not because it's prettier, but because you lived it. Your dreams now are filled with arrangements that can't exist. Vases floating in rivers. Petals that hum. Leaves stitched together by memory. In one dream, you arrange lightning and fog. In another, you just sit beside a field, watching flowers bloom exactly where they should. You start forgetting names. Faces blur. But you always remember the shapes of things, the slant of a pine needle, the whisper of rain on a peony, the exact scent of the first iris each spring. You write fewer notes. Your students fill in the blanks. And one day, quietly, you don't wake up. You pass like a shadow stepping out of its body. No fanfare. Just stillness. Someone ends you with a flower in your hand and a soft smile on your face. They say you died arranging. That's not true. You lived arranging. And that's far stranger. And now, as your breath slows and your eyes grow heavy, imagine the world softening around you. The storm has passed. The flowers are resting. The sword has long since rusted into memory. You sit beneath your old cherry tree, petals falling like slow snow, catching in your hair, drifting into your tea. There's no need to move. No need to speak. Everything important has already been said in the silence between things. Around you, the garden doesn't bloom, it listens. Every leaf tuned to the hush of your thoughts. Every rock placed just where it should be. Even the wind holds its breath, as if not to interrupt. Somewhere far off, a bell rings. A soft, distant chime, like a memory being gently unwrapped. You feel light. Rooted, but drifting. A part of the landscape now. Your breath becomes the breeze. Your stillness becomes shelter. And your story, strange, quiet, beautiful, lives on in the bend of every branch and the hush of every space between. So close your eyes, let the shadows wrap around you like silk, and allow the petals of sleep to settle where they may. You've wandered long enough. Time to rest.